Hi, Rob here. This is Confessions of a Crap Programmer, Episode 7, and once again I'm banging on about compiled sprites. I'm going to take a look at the method of drawing alternate rows of pixels that was mentioned in the comments for Episode 6 last year, and I'll also be explaining one of the better compiled sprite routines I made for Bubble Ghost a few years ago. And this is an updated version of this video because there was a mistake in the section about the Bubble Ghost routine in the original video I posted on Friday. So I've decided to make some edits and then re-upload it. If you've been following my work with the last sprite compiler on Patreon and now Ko-Fi, you'll know that I've just released a new version of the program that generates optimized sprites automatically. Last year, I made a video about the previous version where I used it to create a compiled sprite that looks like this. It uses a mask for drawing with transparency, and the output looked like this with loads of wasteful incl and add HL with BC instructions. Compiled sprites are supposed to be fast, so output like this is not what we're looking for. As I mentioned in that video, when I started working on Arkanoid 2, my old sprite compiler produced the same output, which I then optimized by hand, frame by frame. The problem with doing it this way is that if I want to change the graphics for a sprite, I either have to go through all of this again or try to modify the code directly, which wasn't always possible. For some of the sprites, I found that I wanted to resize them completely because the best way to make a sprite faster sometimes is just to make it smaller. So for this type of sprite that uses a mask for transparency, I've made a new compiler that does all the optimization I was doing by hand automatically. To start with, you can choose to use DE to hold the mask bytes, or otherwise DE is loaded with the most commonly occurring pixel bytes, which also saves 3 t-states every time those values are used. If DE is used for the mask bytes, then the optimizing routine also looks at the pixel data to find strings of 3 or more of the same value being drawn in a row. These values can be loaded into A to save another 3 t-states every time they're used. The optimizing routine also makes an extra check of the contents of the B, C, D and E registers when performing a logical or loading a value into HL to see if the pixel values can be substituted with one of them. BC is still used to move HL to the next pixel pair to draw, but the program only alters C if it can and uses increment and decrement C where possible. So the compiled output is not only much faster, but with all that register substitution going on, the compiled sprites can sometimes actually be smaller memory-wise than the raw graphic data. There's always more that can be done, so I'll continue to develop this routine, but now I want to look at the other sprite I've added to the program. This one uses the stack pointer, and it's one of the routines that I used for the sprites in Bubble Ghost. It's not as clever as the previous routine, but it's still faster than this routine from the video last year. As it processes the values to be loaded into DE, the routine checks to see if the next value to push is the same as the previous one. If it is, then the load DE can be skipped and the same value can just be pushed again. So the compiled sprite is a bit faster, But this routine would really benefit from a trick that Bala Price mentioned in the comments for episode 6. He suggested drawing a sprite in 2 steps using Dec H to move to the next row to draw instead of adding HL with the -1 to 8 in BC. Using Dec H saves 7 t-states compared to add HL with BC, but it skips a row, so you need to make 2 passes to draw the entire sprite. I've been looking at how to implement this as an option for the optimised sprite routines in the last Sprite compiler, and it actually changes things quite a bit depending on how you are drawing. As Bala Price's comment suggests, it's really well suited for these stack drawing routines. If you look at the routine again, HL contains the screen address, which is given to the stack pointer to draw each row. So HL doesn't have to do anything, unlike the optimised routine a minute ago, where HL is constantly being moved to the next byte to draw. There will be a few things to work out for my optimising routine. For sprites that have an odd number of lines vertically, the routine will need to draw a different number of lines on each pass. Another problem will be moving from the first set of alternating lines to the second as efficiently as possible. This fascinating diagram shows a close-up view of the top left corner of the screen. The Sam Coupé uses 1 byte to store 2 pixels and in mode 4 has a horizontal resolution of 256 pixels, so 128 bytes per line. This means that to move to the same byte horizontally on the next line up, you need to subtract 128 from the screen address. And that's why Dec H skips a line, as it's the same as subtracting 256 from HL. So depending on which line we're currently on, the L register will have the 1 to 8 bit set or unset, and this alternates for each line on screen. So all of this means that for sprites that are going to be moving vertically up and down on screen, when I need to move HL up or down by 1 line in the drawing code, there will need to be a check to see if the 1 to 8 bit is set or reset in L. For moving HL up 1 line, if the 1 to 8 bit is set, then it just needs to be reset. If it's already reset, then it will need to be set and H decremented by 1. If the drawing code needs to move HL to the next row down, if the 1 to 8 bit is reset in L, then it just needs to be set. If it is set, then it needs to be reset and H incremented by 1. So, because we need to muck about checking the status of bits, it might just be quicker to do a single add HL with BC for that one jump, as it doesn't require any checks and handles both cases. That would be a shame though, as having BC free for doing something else would be handy. So right now I'm undecided about what to do, but I'm sure I'll have an answer in time for the next video. And all of this is another example of how interesting things get when you're trying to find the fastest way of drawing sprites. And it's also why I really appreciate getting advice from more experienced programmers. I'm really useless at lateral thinking with Z80 assembly, and I don't think I would have thought to use Dec H like this in a million years. I'm hoping that I can use this trick for drawing the bat in Arkanoid 2, as it sits at a fixed position vertically and only moves horizontally, so there's no need to check the 1 to 8 bit of L. It also uses most of the pixels across the whole of its width, so there are fewer pixels to skip while drawing. It's pointless to save 7 t-states with IncH or DecH if I'm wasting more than that to put HL in the right place horizontally before jumping to the next row. Either way, I'm going to try and add a lot of options like this for all the optimised sprite routines in the last Sprite compiler, so the program will be able to make very specifically tailored sprites for any situation. Another thing I want to add support for is clipping, which I've always really struggled with. In fact, I've always just made sure that my sprites keep within the screen area, or in the case of Arkanoid 2, I keep 1 kilobyte of memory directly below the screen free of any program code, so sprites can move off the bottom of the screen without destroying anything important. The only time I've been successful with clipping so far has been with Bubble Ghost, where the big logo scrolls onto the screen. The sprite compiler I wrote for this keeps the number of bytes used for blitting each row identical in length. I'm having to use the Sam Coupé debugger to display the code for this, as the compiler I made for it only produces a binary output. And this is where I made the mistake in the previous version of the video. I didn't look closely enough at what the code was doing, and I completely missed how it was working. So my description of it was completely wrong, and it couldn't actually work the way I described. And this was noticed by Stefan Drissen, who commented that it didn't make sense. So I've had to make some edits, and I really want to thank Stefan for taking the time to question what I said in the original video. To keep the code for each row identical, I couldn't skip any load DE instructions like I did in the optimized version, and the compiler also adds a NOP to the beginning of each row. Keep in mind that the routine is drawing with the stack pointer, so from the last row up. When the sprite is moving off the top of the screen, the routine starts here, and because each row of blitting code is identical in length, I could do some simple maths each frame to work out which row is the last one that needs to be drawn. So before the sprite routine is called, I modify the instructions at the right place to make it stop drawing at this point. The NOP instruction creates enough space to change the code into the sequence of instructions that are normally used at the end of the routine to put the stack pointer back to its original address and then return. So where the routine would add HL with BC and then load the stack pointer with HL to prepare for drawing the next row, I changed the add HL BC into an EXX to get the original stack pointer address, which is preserved in the alternate HL register pair. Then the NOP gets turned into a return, and now the routine can be called as normal, but will return at the point where these changes were made. After returning from the drawing code, everything can get put back to how it was, with the return getting turned back into a NOP, so the routine is ready to be used again. When the logo is appearing from the bottom of the screen, I have a duplicate of the initializing code for the sprite, which can be set to jump to the right line of the sprite code to start drawing. The only downside with this method is that I can't optimize each row of the blitting code, so overall the sprite is being drawn more slowly. This might be why there's some tearing of the sprite, but there's also a bug in there that could be causing this. I wanted to catch it happening for this video because I was really surprised by it at the time, and it would be a nice talking point. But after stepping through the code for about an hour, I couldn't catch it happening, and so I've given up looking. I can remember that the NOP was randomly getting changed into an RST38 by mistake, which meant that the interrupt code was getting called twice for that frame. This is why I suspect that it was causing the tearing. The surprising thing is that it doesn't cause a crash. Somehow, after returning from the interrupt routine, the program counter finds its way back to the right place without drawing anything it shouldn't. I wish I could have caught it happening today, because I can't remember exactly what was happening, and it's really cool that it doesn't cause a crash. Anyhow, this routine will be one of the options for the optimizing routines in the last sprite compiler, and I'll probably add an option for using 1 or 3 NOPs to cater for using a jump or a return instruction, as that seems like a reasonable thing to do. As always, I'd appreciate any feedback or advice or ideas for different sprite routines. I've added links to the Patreon and the new Wubsoft Ko-Fi page to the description below, and I'll be uploading a proper tutorial video for the new Sprite compiler to both of those sites anytime now. For anyone who's interested in it but not enough to join up to either of those sites, I've made the instruction manual for it available for free, and the link for that is also down there somewhere. There'll be at least one more video about compiled sprites coming up soon, but until then, thanks for watching.